For generations, tobacco was a way of life in the heart of the burly tobacco industry, Lexington, Kentucky.
In many of the cities of the southeastern United States, like Raleigh and Durham in North Carolina and Lexington in Kentucky, their prosperity is based upon tobacco.
But by the late 20th century, the deadly health consequences of smoking, including secondhand smoke, were undeniable. Smoking wasn't just an inconvenience to non-smokers, it was a public health hazard. The era of smokers' unlimited rights seemed to be ending.
The right of the smoker to smoke stops at the point where his or her smoking increases the disease risk to those occupying that same environment.
But in Kentucky, tobacco still held power.
Practically speaking, in communities in Kentucky, it is the driving force. There's no question about it.
As Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell, once called a special friend by tobacco lobbyists, later remarked, there was nobody not fighting for tobacco in Kentucky in that era. Nobody. With state and federal government failing to fight for health against tobacco, the Lexington Council stepped up. Choosing responsibility over heritage, they passed a smoke-free ordinance that saved lives and redefined smoking rights, in and beyond the heart of tobacco country. As the 20th century faded, Kentucky's malignant tobacco habit was extracting a heavy toll, with the state leading the nation in lung cancer deaths. But as tobacco companies faced legal repercussions, their hold on Lexington was weakening, and healthcare became Lexington's biggest employer. In 2000, with this new environment, a group of health and civic leaders, including Dr. Ellen Hahn from Lexington's University of Kentucky, took what many residents saw as an unimaginable step, pushing for a near-total ban on public indoor smoking in Lexington.
So I was honored to be one of those who recommended Lexington pursue an ordinance. I kind of thought they'd laugh us out of the room, but they didn't.
Finding an elected official willing to champion an ordinance that polls showed only 18% of Lexington favored was no easy task. Councilmember Dr. David Stevens was willing to face Kentucky's 800-pound guerrilla tobacco lobby and Lexington's deep-rooted tobacco culture.
Lexington was the biggest early tobacco market in the country before the ban was passed.
He felt that for the sake of public health, a smoking ordinance was worth risking his political career.
David worked for about 2 years before they ever brought it to the council.
In 2002, despite some members defending the right to smoke, the council appointed a task force to study a potential ordinance. One restaurant customer summed up the rights versus responsibility debate. Quote, "It's nice for that group to be concerned about public health, but they're infringing on my rights." Despite there being no constitutional right to smoke, this feeling of infringement was not surprising. In addition to Lexington's economic and cultural ties, tobacco companies had sold an addictive product as an expression of adulthood and personal freedom.
Don't come in a bar or a business and tell me not to smoke. It's my right.
Many weren't uncaring, they honestly doubted smoking was dangerous.
I lost one lung. To this day, they cannot tell me that it was because of smoking.
Instead of taking responsibility when smoking was linked to cancer, for years tobacco companies had actively misled consumers. They followed a plan to give smokers a psychological crutch by casting doubt on scientific evidence and the Surgeon General.
The Surgeon General is being, in this case, a politician first and a scientist second.
But with responsible research, Lexington health advocates cleared up misconceptions and changed minds, like that of Lexington restaurant owner Mike Scanlon.
Well, I've heard about the negative effects of secondhand smoke for a long time, never believed it. Ellen Hahn walked in with a report. He said, "This is peer-reviewed." It was fact-based, and from then on, I believed it.
From owning restaurants in smoke-free Arizona cities, Scanlon knew an ordinance would not hurt business. Once he understood the dangers, he was all in for smoke-free.
That we don't have the right to let our employees get sick while we're making all the money.
However, other restaurant owners were unconvinced. Concerned about losing business, many vehemently opposed the ordinance. Surprisingly, most tobacco farmers didn't object. With sales already dwindling from overseas competition, many urged cooperation with health groups, but they were stressed. One farmer said, "We don't want to be painted as legalized dope dealers. This is our livelihood." In the community, while opponents argued it was an unfair ban on a legal product, supporters responded it was not prohibition.
They used that word ban. We weren't banning anyone from smoking. They just had to do it outside.
By the time of Lexington's 2002 nonpartisan election, half of residents favored a ban, but argued over who had the right and responsibility to make it happen. Running for a council seat, Mike Scanlon pushed for a public referendum, saying that with Lexington's tobacco heritage, citizens should decide.
Tobacco literally helped build this community.
Dr. Stevens, running for re-election, argued that in a referendum-difficult Kentucky, it was the council's direct responsibility to protect public health. Both were elected, but the lame duck council tabled proposals for a ban, creating an opening for the convening tobacco-friendly Kentucky state legislature to undermine Lexington's authority. Under the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, if the state passed a smoking law, it would override or preempt any conflicting local ordinances. Tobacco companies had been trying for decades to get weak tobacco preemption laws in all 50 states. Communities in several states had already lost their rights to pass their own smoking ordinances. A Kentucky state legislator did try to preempt Lexington's ordinance, but his ill-formed amendment was tossed out, keeping hope alive and placing responsibility back in the hands of the council. They seized control, gave up on a referendum, and on July 1st, 2003, passed the ordinance. But dissenters were not silent. A group of restaurant owners filed a lawsuit that reframed the question of rights.
It's not really a matter of smokers' rights versus non-smokers' rights. It's really a matter of property owners' rights. Surely the restaurant owner should be able to set the use rules for what goes on in that restaurant.
Though it was backed by tobacco companies, the suit hit at a deep question. Did the smoking ordinance go too far in eroding liberties? In April 2004, the Kentucky Supreme Court answered it did not, saying the council had not only the right, but the duty to protect the health of the public, even at the expense of the rights of property owners. This decision not only upheld Lexington's ordinance, but affirmed the right of all Kentucky communities to enact smoke-free laws.
It's the most important case in local control history.
This decision also reinforced the precedent of prioritizing public health set by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1905. Writing for the majority, Justice John Marshall Harlan, born just 30 miles from Lexington, stated, "Real liberty cannot exist under a principle which recognizes the right of each individual, regardless of the injury that may be done to others." On April 27, 2004, Lexington's smoke-free ordinance finally took effect, making Lexington the first city in a tobacco-dependent state, indeed in the entire South and Midwest, with a comprehensive smoke-free law. Some businesses were negatively impacted, for about a year.
Yeah, it was a big deal, and a lot of them didn't come out on principle for a while.
But peer-reviewed studies found no lasting harm and real gains. Heart attacks fell 23%, asthma emergency room visits 22%, and air pollution 91%. Cited by the Center for Disease Control and the World Health Organization as a model for going smoke-free, Lexington's ordinance has helped many tobacco-friendly areas follow its example, including the University of Kentucky.
And we got a national award for being the first major university in America to go smoke-free. So this ordinance was passed, and it truly did make it possible for us to move this through.
The Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights Foundation called Lexington's ordinance a shot heard round the world for its surprising passage and far-reaching influence. But beyond statistics and awards, the influence of Lexington's ordinance is deeply personal.
Dad walked around on the floor and helped people with their bingo cards. His head was constantly in the smoke that hung around the low ceiling. And the doctor said, well, he has smoker's lungs. He was a non-smoker, and consequently he died of lung cancer. That's why we need the legislation, is to protect people like this.
Rights are not about doing whatever you want. For decades, tobacco companies sold the idea that smoking was a personal freedom, but this was a manipulation. Real freedom comes with responsibility, to ourselves and to others. Yes, we must guard against government overreach, but as Lexington showed, government can fulfill its responsibilities and achieve a thoughtful balance of rights.
We did spend a lot of time listening to the public and respecting their opinion.
Kentucky still has no statewide smoke-free law.
So there's still a lot of opposition to it on the personal freedom, private property rights issue.
Even so, the fact that Lexington could overcome its cultural and economic roots for the greater good gives hope for the future. A city built by tobacco came together to build something new. Cleaner air and responsible liberty.
If our council said one day we want to go back and strike down the ban, I suspect we would have a riot on our hands.